This class is now being recorded. Welcome to everybody. I want to thank Rabbi Yosef Plotkin very, very much. It's the week before Pesach, and I know it's really a big deal to give up this time, and we're very, very appreciative of Rabbi Plotkin for joining us and giving us this class today. I'm going to put the spotlight on you so we can all see you a little bit better. There we go. And thank you so much for joining us. And whenever you're ready, please take it away.
All righty. Okay. Just tell me, is everybody familiar with the topic, or should we do that introduction as well?
Please do the introduction.
Excellent. Okay. So as I'm sure everybody is aware of, we have the upcoming holiday of Pesach, a Passover that's beginning this Saturday night, this Motzei Shabbat. So I guess what's been going on, as so has been told, that every week you would visit another community around the world and you would hear from the local rabbi about the community, the people, the history, etc. So this week we're going to do something a little bit different, and that is that we are going to take you into the behind scenes of a worldwide Pesach holiday. Instead of just visiting one community and seeing what goes on over there in connection with this upcoming holiday of Pesach, I want to invite you on a little bit of a trip with me and see how Pesach is celebrated around the world. And the reason why, or how I know what takes place around the world is because, and this is, I guess, the theme of today's class, that in the 1940s, when the Jews, after the war, and they came, many of them immigrated to America, there were very strong but few established Jewish communities around the United States: New York, Chicago, Pittsburgh, etc. California even had somewhat of a small Jewish community. And as people were coming in, they're immigrating wherever they're able to find jobs, or wherever the stops along the train, the railroad were, and that's where they would get off, and that's where they would find something to do, and they would find some work. So throughout America, there were a lot of Jewish people. I wouldn't even call them communities because they weren't yet established as communities. I'll mention that I'm over here. I'm right now in Greensboro, North Carolina. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. But in North Carolina, you would assume that Charlotte, which is the largest city in North Carolina, would have had a strong Jewish community. But that wasn't always the case. On the contrary, there are smaller cities over here. For example, High Point, North Carolina, which is a way smaller city than Charlotte, but always had a strong Jewish community with a mikvah, with a shul, with a shochet, etc. And the reason for that is because a lot of the American furniture was manufactured in High Point, North Carolina, and that's where the Jewish merchants came. And then they started into the manufacturing, etc. So basically, communities were built around where the jobs were. But there were jobs all over. And there were Jewish people that lived all over America. So the previous Rebbe, when he first came in 1940, and he understood what was taking place in America, that unlike in Eastern Europe where people congregated around the shtetl and it was very unheard of to go outside to find a job, people always kept within a community. In America, things were going to be a little bit different. And therefore, he established something that every summer, the student rabbis were to travel around the country and to visit all these smaller or maybe smaller communities and individual families just to keep them in touch with their Judaism. And the kind of the sales pitch that they would use as they were traveling around was like in the olden days, even in the shtetl days or Eastern Europe, there were different synagogues, and you would have a Torah, or you have a tefillin, or you have a mezuzah that was written by a scribe. Not every shtetl was able to have a full-time scribe. So what the scribes would do actually, and this dates back even in the times of biblical times almost, they would travel from town to town, and they would come and they would inspect the Sefer Torah, they would inspect the mezuzah, and just to make sure it's kosher. And if someone needed a new one written, they would write it for them. But because people didn't always have access to a sofer in their community. And so these student rabbis, to a certain extent, they were like these scribes. They would travel from town to town. They would meet with a handful of Jewish families or individual Jewish families. They would offer them services, Jewish books, kosher a kitchen, put up a mezuzah, just for people to have that connection with their Judaism. And just to give it a number, there's somewhat like 21, 22 million Jews, somewhat around there, around the world. There's probably more than 1 million Jews that live outside of a Jewish community. When I mean outside of a Jewish community, I don't mean like they live in Chicago, but they're not affiliated. They live in a place that they're the only family there, or there's 2 families in that town, or 3 families in that town. So they can't even create a community. There isn't even a community for them to affiliate with or to connect with. So again, back in the 1940s, the previous Rebbe would establish this idea that they would go visit all these different communities. And what would happen is when these student rabbis would go out and they would search for the Jews, like in a typical old-fashioned way, they would open up the phone book, and every Goldschmidt and every Zimmerman and every Cohen got a phone call from those rabbis. And when they were able to put together a nice list or quite a few families like that, they would put them in touch with each other. And from that, Jewish communities have blossomed just by bringing in one Jew at a time in that manner. Okay, so that was in the 1940s. Fast forward to the 1980s, and then Chabad took it up a step and said, we're visiting all these communities. We're in touch with them. We know about them. And so what are we doing for them until they can establish their own full-time rabbi or full-time community? How can we service them as a community? And that's when Chabad started sending out student rabbis, not just to visit with the families, but to try to form communities, primarily over the holiday of Pesach, which is the most celebrated Jewish holiday on the calendar. And sometimes for the high holidays, they would go to these communities and bring them together that they can celebrate as a community. So that is something that has been taking place for, like I said, for quite some time now. And that has blossomed in that every year, pre-Corona, we can say, PC, right? BC, before Corona, we can say that there were hundreds of student rabbis that would go out throughout the world to all these communities and help them out with their Passover, or to be able to help them out with their holidays together as a community. So how does that work? How does that work? I guess we have to figure out 2 things. We have to find out which community is suitable and how do you get sent over there, right? Many times Chabad rabbi is asked the question, did you have a choice to go where you went? Did you have a choice to move to Chicago? Did you have a choice to move to North Carolina? So how is this matching, when in medical school, after medical school, they have to match you up with a residency. It could be anywhere around the world. So how does it work with these student rabbis traveling? So Chabad headquarters in New York, they actually have a database throughout all the years with all these different families that were and communities that have been visited, and they know the numbers are approximately. And as Chabad rabbis move closer proximity to those communities, so it may not be that headquarters would know about that community, but now there's a Chabad rabbi that lives 2 hours away, and he knows that 2 hours away from him, there is a small town or a big town that has a X amount of Jews over there, and there isn't a full-time synagogue, there isn't a full-time rabbi or Jewish center. So he would reach out to Chabad headquarters and he would notify them that it may be premature to have a full-time Jewish organization there, but there are most definitely enough Jews to be able to benefit from a visiting rabbi. So they, like I said, they have a database and they have a list of all such cities. And we're talking about probably close to 400 of such cities around the world. Just to give you an example, it was in the year, I think it was year 2001. So I was the coordinator in Chabad headquarters of assigning, we would have a list of cities and then we would have applicants of student rabbis, and we would match them up, the student rabbi, to different cities. So there were probably 200 or 100 cities, close to 100 cities in Russia. 100 cities in Russia that had Jews, a decent amount of Jews. We're talking about anywhere between, let's say, 10 families to 50, 60, 70 families, and they didn't have a full-time rabbi. So what we did with those 100 cities, and now we needed to get 200 student rabbis that were prepared to travel, and they would travel in pairs of 2. and we'll discuss of how it's arranged once they get there. But if I can pull up this picture, just give me 1 second over here. It's not such a big picture. Let's see if we can do that here. So you can see this is a group, all American, only English speakers, right? And this was in Russia, it's called Krasny Ploshad, which is the red square. And this was them, a part of the group. They were posing for a picture before they actually all went out. So this is a whole group of student rabbis that flew from New York. They flew to Moscow. We spent there probably 2 days in Moscow, and then every 2 individuals. So they paired up 2 rabbis, 2 student rabbis per city. And you know, there wasn't much known about the city before they got there. They knew a little bit about the community, but obviously most of it was going to be hands-on. So that is just a little bit of, so they're able to collect the data. They know where these Jews are. They know where the communities are. They send out opportunities for student rabbis to be able to do that. And they send out, this is just a group that went to Russia, which is only one country. There was probably another 30 student rabbis that went to Germany. Ukraine got their own 40 rabbis. Australia got theirs. In Africa. Now, I'll tell you, I spent one Pesach in Nigeria, Abuja, Nigeria. Now, Abuja, Nigeria sounds very, very far away. Abuja, Nigeria is now the capital of Nigeria. It used to be Lagos, and now it's Abuja. And there are a lot of Israelis and a lot of Americans, mostly in the business, well, either in oil or infrastructure, that were living over there, and they even had their families with there as well. And there was substantially enough. There was enough to be able to host. A Seder. I'm going to try to pull up as I go. Let me see. I'm going to try to see if I can pull up pictures from Abuja, Nigeria. Now, what's interesting is that 15 years ago, I went to visit Abuja, Nigeria, and we did a Seder over there. We did the high holidays. Believe it or not, now there's a full-time Chabad rabbi and rebbitzin living in Abuja, Nigeria. But that groundwork was laid by the student rabbis that would go and they would visit and they would gather the people and they would reach out. You know, before Pesach, we went to visit all the Jewish people that we knew. We put together a Seder. We probably had 50 people at the Seder. And believe it, you know, and then you fast forward a few years, and now there's a full-time Chabad rabbi and rebbitzin. So Africa at the time, from the Ivory Coast to Nigeria to Ghana, I'm trying to think of all the names, because I would have to assign the student rabbis to all those places, to Ethiopia, to Uganda, right? And they all got it. Now, when you look at it, most of those cities, actually Ghana, the country of Ghana has a full-time Chabad rabbi. Ethiopia has a full-time Chabad rabbi. And they're only dealing with the locals only based on the groundwork that the student rabbis did throughout their visits. So to a certain extent, these student rabbis, they're the ones that allowed for Chabad centers to open up around the world. It would be almost impossible for a Chabad center to open up in these remote areas. Again, if it's in Chicago and you're just going out of a suburb, so the local community of Chicago knows what's going around Chicago. But if it's a country, right, if we're talking about a far-fetched country, so it would be the student rabbis that would go and they would lay the work there. Now let's look at it. The student rabbis, you come to a town and then what do you do? So you know of 10 people. Where do you start? What do you do? So let's say, what's the preparation from when you find that couple and you find that community, and now what happens? So first of all, there's training that takes place for the Chabad rabbis, just to know about the local community. Obviously, what to know when you're running a Seder. Most places, I'll tell you something. You know, you think about grape juice. I remember there was one time when I went to Ukraine to run a Seder, and another classmate of mine was assigned to a different city. So I had someone I was with, and he was with somebody else. And it was before cell phones or text message or things like that. So when we would gather together, we all had stories to share, right? So I asked him, we were talking about it. He said, what happened? He says, well, my shipment of grape juice never came. So I said, so what did you do? So he says, well, I called up the central office and where we were sent from, and they said, well, the only option is to go to the market and buy grapes and start squeezing grapes. And that's literally what they did. They bought the grapes. They had no wine. They had no grape juice, right? The shipment didn't arrive. And this is things that you can't just call up and you can go to a local store. But this is things that people were dealing with. When I went to Ukraine, I remember, and we checked into the hotel, which you can only imagine what type of hotel. This was in the mid 1990s. And they asked a strange question. They said, when do you want to take a shower? And I don't know. I was never asked that question. So I said, I don't know, 8 o'clock in the morning. Sure enough, 8 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock on the door and someone came in with 2 buckets of hot water. That throughout the night, they had these immersion boilers, like people that would travel. I don't know, I'm a lot younger, but some people say when they would travel, you would have this immersion thing. You would put it into a cup of water, you would plug it in and it would heat up the cup of water. So basically they had those immersion boilers, there was immersion heaters into those buckets, and that's what they had. But so you have to be open for any option. Right? You're going over there and you have to be either creative or you have to take like a survival kit to get through the trip. But there's a lot more than that. There's a lot of training. You should know what's the proper way of running a Seder. And this is, for the most part, this is people that student rabbis, they've never led a Seder before. So that would be what takes place. One of the things they place. Another thing that's place, you're given a limited amount of a budget. Right? So you're given $500. I'm going back 20 years ago, $1,000, $1,500. You would come. What would be arranged is that someone would come pick you up from the airport or the train station. They would bring you to the hotel, and that reservation was made. Now you got to cook. So you would hire some, and there was always a contact person. You would hire a local man, woman, whoever it was that was going to help out cook, and then you would go to the market. And a lot of these places, there isn't supermarkets, there aren't a kosher aisle or a kosher store. You would literally go to the market and you would start choosing. You're picking up the vegetables, the fruits, the vegetables. You're going to the fish market. You get in the fish market. Then you're going into where the Seder was going to take place, and you have to kosher the kitchen, which is part of the course that you would take beforehand of how to kosher a kitchen. So basically, everything that took place in that town during that time for that Pesach, it was all under your jurisdiction. There wasn't anybody saying, okay, X, Y, and Z, or 1, 2, 3, these are the steps to do it. You're assigned a community, you're assigned a budget, and then you had to make things work. And that kind of leads into the theme or into the idea, because every Chabad center, for the most part around the country, should be self-sufficient or self-independent. And if you look at it as if you want to call it the business perspective of the Chabad movement, which is unlike many other, if not all other Jewish organizations, and this is something that the Rebbe implemented right away from the beginning, and that is that there shouldn't be a central office dictating to the local communities. The Rebbe was of the opinion, if I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina, there's nobody that knows Greensboro, North Carolina in the Chabad movement better than I would know. So for someone to sit in headquarters in a swirly chair and say that they think that in Greensboro should have a preschool, well, they may be out of touch because there may not be any children over here. Maybe it's a college town, etc. So it's very decentralized, and every local community is meant to make the decisions best suited for them. And that's part of what takes place. You go to a community and you find out what their needs are, and you find out how many people there are, and you find out what they're interested in, etc. And that's how you would build a community based on their needs, right? I once made a Seder and I found out that most people in this are vegetarians, right? So it'd be pointless to go to buy fish or to bring chicken with, right? That's not what type of people they are. So just like it would work for the diet and for the Seder, it would also have to work for everything else that's taking place over there. But every group that goes out, there's the matching of the student rabbi in the community. You get to the community, there's a contact person, you're given a budget, and then the rest you have to do on your own to make it happen. And I can tell you, I was very much part of that program. I've spent a Pesach on almost every continent. So I did a Pesach in Newcastle, New South Wales in Australia. I did it in Russia. I did it in Ukraine. I did it in like I said, I was in Abuja. Obviously, I was in Israel, I was in Florence, Italy, and also like when I went to Florence, Italy to do a Seder, that was before there was a permanent Chabad center over there. They would have one for the tourists, but then they realized that there are a lot of American students that would have an exchange program in the arts to attend university in Florence University. So NYU and many other prominent American universities would have like a partnership program. So it turned out you had a lot of American and obviously Jewish students that are right now in Florence, Italy, but they're not in contact with anything because it's a foreign country. So now there's a full-time Chabad presence in Florence, Italy. But I remember when we did the Seder, we rented an apartment and we had 60 students. We just hung up. We went around again. You have to know what's going on in the local community. We printed out signs, we put it around the different campuses that were there, and we had 60 students that would show up. That led to the ability of a full-time Chabad rabbi coming around over there. So like I start off in saying that we're talking about Seders or communities around the world, because I think although every community is unique, the way it was established in many places was by the student rabbis going out over there and finding out the Jewish community, seeing if there's a need, and if there was a need, later on, there was an active search to find a Chabad presence. The very first Seder I ever led, I was actually 17 years old. I was a student rabbi. I was studying in Israel, and I went to the Ukraine. This was in 1997, so it wasn't too much long after the fall of the former Soviet Union. And the people that came out over there, you had the elderly people that spoke Yiddish even from before the revolution, or they remembered from that. So the revolution was 70 years prior. So if they were a child or if they were being raised by the parents or grandparents, they spoke Yiddish. But for the most part, the Seder was all translated. Those spoke Russian and I spoke English, and we had a translator. We had a translator that would translate everything. And I still remember it to this very day. And I try to repeat this every year at my Seder here, my community and family Seder in Greensboro. It was towards the end of the Seder, and there was an elderly person that got up and he asked if he could speak. And I'll tell you, when someone at a Seder and he wants to speak, you let them speak. Just even before I go there, I remember something else. Before we went to Ukraine, we had a meeting with the Chabad coordinator that was living in Ukraine, and he said that in the former Soviet Union, it's not about numbers. Back in the day, there was revolutions, there was demonstrations. It was all about how many numbers you can bring out or how many numbers are supporting you. He said the most critical part is a one-on-one experience. So when you're searching out for the Jew, don't try to get 100 Jews that are coming or things like that. You have to make sure that every Jew that comes is able to connect to their Judaism. So that being said, there was someone that came up at the end of the Seder and asked if he can say something. And I was like, sure. And it was all through a translator. But I remember very clearly, he went to the Seder plate and he picked up the egg. And he turns to this community. The first time they ever experienced the Seder as a community. This is just less than 10 years after the fall of communism. This was the first time that they had a student rabbi or any rabbi that would visit there, and which later on led to a full-time Chabad rabbi. But at the end, it was just bringing them together. And he was so emotional, and he went to the Seder plate and he picked up the egg and he turns to the crowd and he says, you know why we have an egg on the Seder plate? And he says, because the egg is like the Jew. The more they try to cook us, the harder we become. And I remember, and I share this every year like that. He says the egg, it starts off soft, but the more they try to cook us, the harder we became. Which is obviously in the theme of Pesach. But that's, again, like I said, there is Crete, or I'm not sure if it's pronounced Crete or Crete, which is the Greek islands, right, in southern Greece. And so there's no Chabad community over there. But what turns out is that there are so many tourists that are going to visit the Crete Islands during those times. So I remember one year I went, it was a beautiful place. So I have to say, from all the places that I've ever done a Pesach Seder, it was, I'm forgetting, Heraclius, one of those islands over there, off in the Crete Islands in the southern of Greece, and you run a Seder over there. But we had 100 people that were coming together, which otherwise they didn't have that community. They didn't have that opportunity. So really, it's something that takes place, again, like around the world. The largest Seder nowadays is held in Nepal. And believe it or not, in Nepal, there's over 2,000 Israeli backpackers. because they go to Nepal, they want to go to Mount Everest, etc. They go on their hiking and they're climbing and they're camping. And for the Seder, there's over 2,000 Israeli backpackers that get together. And now there's a full-time Chabad rabbi, and before Passover, there's 10 student rabbis that go over and they lead all the Seder together. But how did it start off? The largest Seder in the world started off with 2 Chabad student rabbis that went there just to see what's going on. And they went to all the hostels, and they hung up signs throughout that there's going to be a Passover Seder at this and this time, this and this place, and people showed up. And then they went back the year after, and the year after. Now in Israel, all the national media, they always highlight the largest Seder in the world is with the Israeli backpackers in Nepal that all started with 2 student Chabad rabbis that went there. So obviously there's a lot of follow-up that takes place as well from all these places that are visited. And I must say that probably 70% of Chabad centers around the world have been established through this program of student rabbis going there, finding the communities, finding the cities, the Jews over there, bringing them together, which allowed for a formal Jewish community to be formed. So that's just on the spiel of around Chabad around the world, of how it goes a little bit. There's the city, there's the rabbis, you match them up. The student rabbis are given then the responsibility to go there, search, find, establish, and report back. And when they report back, the follow-up is that it can lead to a formal established community. I just also want to talk a little bit about what takes place over here in Greensboro, North Carolina. Greensboro, North Carolina is known for, I mentioned earlier, for a high point. But North Carolina, or at least in this area of North Carolina, is known most for furniture. Twice a year, there is the International Furniture Market that takes place in High Point that attracts over 80,000 people. That's twice a year. So basically all the furniture stores, whatever the retailer is, I mean, not just the Costco and Rooms to Go and an American Value City, or all these things, but also all the other types of things. They would come, and that's where they do all their shopping. Like I said, 80,000 people come, which actually at the show, we take out a showroom over there, and we have minions 3 times a day, and we have kosher food, and we're able to help out all the Jewish visitors to that. But Greensboro has a community of close to 1,000 Jewish families that live in Greensboro, North Carolina. There's a Jewish day school over here. That's a K-8 school. There's a Chabad, there's a Reform, there's a Conservative over here as well. There's a Federation over here. But this is just like one small town. And how did we find wind of this? How did we even know about Greensboro, North Carolina? Well, there were Chabad student rabbis that visited many cities in North Carolina. Winston-Salem, Greensboro, High Point, and many other areas, Asheville. And as a result, when they found out that what's taking place over here and that there was an interest and a need for Chabad to move down, it was based on that groundwork that we were able to move. So we moved here 12 years ago. And on a traditional year, on a typical year, we would have a community Seder, which also is very, again, every place is different. But for us, the closest big city, and I'm not talking about huge, I'm talking about the closest next in size would be Raleigh, which is like an hour and a half away, or Charlotte, which is an hour and 45 minutes away. So it's very hard. If you don't have family in the city, it's not something that you just go and 15 minutes away, you have friends or your family. It's very much isolated. So if someone's coming to Greensboro, it's for Greensboro. They're not going to travel to Charlotte for kosher food, not going to travel to Charlotte for minyan, and they're probably not going to travel to Charlotte for a Pesach Seder. So we usually have a community Seder of over 100 people that would attend the Seder. Obviously, due to COVID, we weren't able to do it last year, and this year as well, we're still unable to do it. So in our efforts over here, first of all, we delivered Shmura Matzah to every Jewish home. We're just wrapping up that project of close to 1,000 homes in Greensboro. That we had a whole team of volunteers that went and delivered to every Jewish family some Shmura Matzah. And as well as that, we're offering Seder to-go kits, which basically is, a Seder plate with all the items of the Seder plate, with a wine or grape juice, and a Seder dinner, fish or chicken or meat, whatever it is. And people are able to come and pick up, or we are able to deliver them. So this way, we're able to make a meaningful Pesach for someone who is unable to attend a Seder, or they're unable to travel to family, or family can't get to them, or they're in an assisted living that doesn't allow visitors, etc. So this way we're doing our part to make sure that anybody and everybody is able to have a meaningful and a full-on experience of Pesach, even if they may be alone or unable to travel. So they're doing it for the first time. We do it. We are providing with all their needs. That's almost about it, unless there's questions or comments.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure that there are some questions. If anyone has a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Just press the unmute button on the computer, or if you're on the phone, you can press star and then 6 to unmute yourself, and you go ahead and jump in with a question. I have a couple of questions myself, but I'll let others go in first. If anyone has a question, go right ahead. Okay, I don't hear anybody. So I just wanted to tell you, Rabbi Plotkin, it was interesting that you mentioned Abuja, Nigeria, because that's actually one of the places that we have had the rabbi from there, the Chabad Shliach from there, give a class just a few weeks ago, or I may be misremembering, it might be a couple of months ago by now, but it was very, very interesting to see what's going on in Abuja, Nigeria. So it was interesting to hear from you that that was all set up by the student rabbis who go out. Another question I had was, when you're running the program from central headquarters, do you ever have an issue with not enough student rabbis being available to go out?
So that's something which is interesting. Sometimes it really depends on the year. For the most times, there are more applicants than places for people to be able to go visit. And also, now when there's a lot more applicants, what we try to do is also try to match them up with a native language. So if someone speaks Spanish or Portuguese, they'll go to South America. Nowadays, if there's someone that speaks Russian, so then they will go to Russia or to Ukraine. So we try to do somewhat of a matching. So sometimes we may not be able to find someone that has a native language, and therefore we'll search elsewhere. But there are most definitely more applicants than places, but not always are they I'm not going to use the term the right applicant, but it may not be the perfect match. But there are usually more applicants than locations.
You mentioned before a situation where the student rabbis' shipment of grape juice didn't come through. Have you ever had a situation where the student rabbis got into any more crisis than that? Any trouble with the local law enforcement or anything of that nature?
So it tends to happen, especially when you think about the former Soviet Union, especially in the earlier days. And I don't know if it was like trouble with authorities or more people that were looking to take advantage of them. But it would happen, and there was the 24-hour, if you want to say, a hotline that someone you're able to be in touch with that was able to sort things out. There were times that they were there and the hotel just decided to close down in the middle and you had to find another place, or even an injury. You cut, you slip, and you cut yourself, and now you're in this town, and what do you do now? So they would put you in touch with either a local doctor, or they would bring you out. There would come someone who come help you. I don't remember any major medical issues that would take place, but there were times, someone needed stitches, someone needed some medical assistance that was coordinated. So every country, like I'm thinking, Russia, Ukraine, or something, there was that coordinator that was available 24/7. Obviously, if it was more of a Western country, if you're in Greece, so things are a little bit different than they may be in a small shtetl in Ukraine. But wherever they went, there was always a phone number. Part of the things is that they were given a cell phone of somebody that they can always be in contact with 24/7 to arrange it. And also, it's something which it would be difficult to do from New York because they're not so familiar with every locale, and it's also the time difference. So wherever they went, they were always in connection with somebody that was able to help out in any given circumstances.
Beautiful. Well, unless anyone has any questions that they want to jump in with, I want to Thank you very much, Rabbi Plotkin. Again, to mention that it's the week before Pesach. Everyone's very, very busy. So the fact that you were able to take out from your busy schedule and help us out by giving this fantastic class, we're very, very appreciative. And we want to wish you a great deal of hatzlacha, much success and blessing in your holy work there in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Well, thank you, everybody. I want to wish everybody a happy and kosher Pesach. That we should experience the true holiday of freedom from the virus, freedom from exile, and we should all Lashana Haba b'Yerushalayim by next year, we should all be together in Jerusalem, and let us say Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Very
No
good.
problem. Okay. Bye-bye.